now going to move on. We have with us Mr. Yogesh Kochchar. I met Yogesh a few years ago when we spoke at the Rotary meeting, I think, on the issue of, should I call it an issue? Yeah, it is an issue. Issue of CSR, because CSR, corporate social responsibility. You can hardly see it in India Inc. because CSR is lip service in most companies. It's not really a part of the business model. It's about doing a fancy event, and I remember way back we had engaged with a company called DLF India, a very senior vice president, I forget his name, some people you are best forgotten. And I remember Meenu and I had gone to meet with him, and the first meeting, when I came out of the meeting, I was very confused because I never understood what he said to us. Because he wanted ideas about how can he present to his managing director some ideas about what should be done in CSR. And his idea was that, you're doing this entire award thing, and also why don't we kind of collaborate with you and do it? And I was like a little confused. I said, let me think about what you said and come back to you. Second meeting, I told him, I said, DLF has this tagline called Building India. I said, if you really want to build India, and you're probably the largest land bank in the country, what you should do is you should address the issue of the brick workers, right? Now, most people who work in brick kilns are people who lost their farms or have been deprived of their livelihood because of bad policy and industrialization. And they work in brick kilns. A family of 4 works in brick kilns for just 60 rupees a day. And the brick kiln workers, it's a vicious circle because the man signs, it's like the new liberalized form of bonded labor, if I may call it that. So a man signs a bond with a broker for a brick kiln, and the man does not know what he's signing on because he puts his thumbprint over there. And he's given 5,000 rupees. I'm just telling you how the circle works. And that 5,000 rupees, the man buys some things for his family, for his children, for his wife, and maybe a week later he's spent the 5,000 rupees. Now, in that contract, it is written that he has to deliver 1,000 bricks every day. Now, it's impossible for one man to deliver 1,000 bricks every day. So the wife joins him, and the 2 children join him. So there's child labor, which is the first part of the vicious circle. Now, working in the brick kilns, they get paid 60 rupees a day, and out of that 60 rupees, the 5,000 rupees has to be recovered, right? So what they probably get in hand is around 30 rupees a day after the broker has also been given his cut. Now, 30 rupees a day, which Montek Singh Ahluwalia says is good enough for a family to survive, is not actually good enough. So the mother has to feed her children. So what does she do? Now, she's migrant labor in a big city, working in a brick kiln or in a construction site. So she has no choice but to go to the Nukkad Daba and solicit. Now, this is the second issue which comes up, which is commercial sex work. Now, a lot of people in that society would see that woman as a bad woman, but no, that woman is actually a mother because she's soliciting because she has to feed her children, right? So there are several issues: bonded labor, child labor, sex work. Now, this sex work leads to HIV, so it's a vicious circle over there because most of the times this lady is sleeping with the truck drivers, right? Now, what we propose to DLF is that why don't you do a campaign called something like Bloody Bricks or something, Let's educate people in civil society, so-called civil society, that we are living in condominiums which are built with the sweat and blood of people who are working in brick kilns. A family of 4 working for 60 rupees a day. Man, woman, and children. That's the sad. But no, DLF didn't want to because it's a political issue. We don't want to affect the brick mafia, right? Now, DLF could have done that, but now what they wanted to do was they wanted to do a fancy party, and then they finally kind of chose to sponsor IPL for 5 years. IPL was CSR. Sorry, I'll speak very strongly against this because this is exactly what I spoke in Rotary also, where I first met Yogesh. And Yogesh hopes to start something called CS Realm, which is going to be an online and an offline initiative to mobilize CSR to become more humane and become more involved in the process of change. May we call upon Yogesh Kochchar. Yogesh is now with the Microsoft India. He's the Director Strategic Engagement, and he's going to speak on CSR and his initiative, his idea of how he plans to engage them and involve them more in the process of change. You have 10 minutes, yeah?
Oh, you want me to speak? Yes. Can I just take this? Sure. Thanks. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Jerry tells me I have just 10 minutes, and I'm very happy about that because I don't think I have more material than that. So I'll start specifically with the issue of India. I wonder how many of us went in and saw this film called Chakravyuh, which came to the theaters recently, and it talks about a very, very telling story, which is set in Jharkhand and some of those areas, which are absolutely unreachable for most of us in this country here. So out of 650 districts, close to about 180 districts in this country are notified by the government of India as districts that have the terror problem. So if each district had to be a unit, you can imagine that out of 650 units or 650 beings, 180 beings are actually terrorists. So you can imagine that every third guy standing behind you is either botched up and he's going to do something which is going to affect our lives. And as Jerry pointed out, we need to be responsible for what it is that we're doing, and we need to look beyond our own selves to see how is it that we can go ahead and correct this malady in the society. And I'll jump on to a very interesting anecdote, and this is said somewhere in Mahabalipuram for some of us that have traveled on that East Coast road, which is off Chennai, and you're going towards Pondicherry. Mahabalipuram, and if you've actually halted there, they're very nice shacks there. They sell you some great beer, great fish, but also what you have there is a whole bunch of boats that are lying abandoned there. This is the post-tsunami phenomena. Pre-tsunami, and it turns out, and I did extensive research on this, and I used to work for Tata's back then, and they gave me the opportunity to sort of really go out and understand the issues. They're a very committed organization. A lot is happening there. A lot more ought to happen, which hopefully should happen or will happen. So I discovered that villages that may have had about 100 fishermen and 10 boats pre-tsunami actually came back post-tsunami with about 100 boats and 10 fishermen. And that happened because everybody went ahead and donated a boat. And they felt very happy that they had gone ahead and done a great job because they gave away boats. But the challenge was that the econometrics was now standing up on its head. People that ought to have gone ahead with fishing, because of that econometrics, would now no longer go ahead and do fishing because nobody knew who was the master, because everybody had some 10-odd boats. So they decided they would make groups. But over a period of time, the tsunami tourism started, and a whole bunch of people started coming in. And I actually went out into the sea with one of these people, with one of these boatmen, and we'd barely sailed about 200-odd meters, about 300 meters, when he started demanding some extra money. And he says, life is tough, and can we get some extra money? And we showing you the sea here, and so on. So the challenge is that with the econometric standing up on its head, there's too much of aid leads to aid, and that was something that sort of set me thinking in terms of what is CSR. So I discovered, and I went through documents, and I discovered that CSR, corporate social responsibility, is something that is embodied in the Millennium Development Goals that have been proposed by the United Nations. And these are all encompassing, really. So, you don't have to look beyond the 8 MDGs, which is education, which is also child rights, which is also women emancipation, which is also financial inclusion, and a whole bunch of those. So all those 8 MDGs are actually very, very strong goals that the United Nations has set forth, and India fares very, very poorly. We're very, very poor across all those 192 odd nations that have gone ahead and signed on and we are signatories to the Millennium Development Goals, but we don't hear about them. What we hear about is how 1,000 tribal women or about 100 tribal women are being trained archery, are trained on archery, or we hear about 100 odd sewing machines being given away. And we hear most corporates raving and ranting in terms of the last paragraph as part of the annual report that they file, and they say, you know, we went ahead and did a great job because we worked with some children and possibly some brick kiln or what have you, and you know, we gave some 10 cycles, and that's about CSR. Now, whereas I would like to blame the corporates, I think the challenge is that the corporates themselves don't understand what CSR is. You know, we make temples in the name of CSR, and we expect people to sort of go there, and that is CSR too. But I said, if these 8 Millennium Development Goals are actually the all-encompassing humane or goals that have been set forth by United Nations, there's a good chance that a country's competitiveness is likely to be judged also amongst some of the other aspects, which is the legal structure, which is the framework, which is, you know, the bilateral trade treaties that we have, et cetera, but also in terms of what are the achievements of this nation with respect to the 8 Millennium Development Goals. And the fact that I work for Microsoft, I'm privy to a lot of confabulations that happen among some of these companies that sort of go ahead and approach the FIPB, applying for permission and trying to figure out what's what, trying to understand what's the social fabric of this country, because that's where they essentially have to go and sell. And they get very worried, and they point to this Millennium Development Goals theory, and they say, you know, why is it that India is not doing as well as it ought to? So you know, all that sort of went ahead and rattled me a little bit, and then the floods happening in Bihar, I realized that aid that should have actually gone to Darbhanga, for instance, was being diverted to Nalanda because the chief minister comes from there. So people said, you know, if these people needed some 10 bags, give them 100 bags, but these guys that needed 100 bags got possibly not even 10 bags. So once again, the econometrics, which is the supply chain, et cetera, it gets distorted, and there are, you know, political reasons for that, there are other reasons for that, and it is essentially the NGOs that actually go ahead and give the aid into some of these villages, because for a person that's lost his cattle, that's lost his house, needs that food now, whereas the chief minister approaches the prime minister much later, and that aid gets disbursed to the state about an year later, and most of that aid goes God knows where, because by that time these people all settled, and they settled essentially not because of the aid that went from the prime minister's fund, but they settled because the NGOs worked hard. So that's a great job that some of the NGOs are doing, but not all of them are as earnest about public service, but some of them that do the job, they definitely deserve a good word. So I started sort of worrying a little more about this, and I discovered, and I came to the conclusion that for sure there is a space in the market, and that there is a market in that space. So CSR is all about going ahead and ensuring that we create sustainable lives, sustainable livelihoods. And if that had to happen, then we had to start worrying about markets. So I came about with a model that has been recognized by the United Nations Global Compact team, and a whole bunch of other people, and I'm sort of talking about that model, and it gives me great pleasure to share that with you in the next 1 minute. So what I said was that we have a nation that has about 35 states and union territories put together. So let's first go ahead and block all those 35. And beyond, and the second level, we have about 640, 650 odd districts. Let's go and plot them on a map. And beyond that, the third level is where you have some 2,200 odd blocks. So we said also plot these 2,200. So we've got essentially 3 layers: the states, the districts, and the blocks. Now let's go ahead and identify, and let's make the block development officer of that block responsible for identifying the issues that conform to the Millennium Development Goals and the performance of the MDGs within his block. Once he's done that, so that's one part of the story, which is in terms of identification of issues. Next, we said, let's go ahead and plot all the corporates in the country and say, you please tell us where all are you guys doing work here. So a company like Videocon, for instance, could be selling something in Manipur or in Mizoram, but they couldn't be holding their office there, and that's fine, that's perfectly okay. And they can't therefore reach Mizoram to do any CSR there. But we said, okay, if you have your office in a certain place, then you have the ability to lead, and if you are selling something, then you have the ability to support. Next, we said, if that be the case, there's a good chance that if we were to actually go ahead and create an electronic database and aggregated all the various companies across this map across these 3 layers, the good chance that we shall then have a whole bunch of companies that can then be identified in a single block. And here is the answer. So assuming that the block development officer of that block said he needed a school to come up here, and the school must have 5 classrooms, and the only person that had his factory there could be Amara Raja Batteries, who are backside of Beyond. So, you know, there's a good chance that they could lead an initiative. Now, they can't do no more than give a battery there, but if they were to just provide the entire initiative a small engineer, there's a good chance that, you know, ACC Cement, if they had the dealership there, could contribute a couple of bags of cement. Kajaria Ceramics could go ahead and contribute some tiles. Videocon Televisions could actually go ahead and provide them with a television. Somebody who was selling inverters because power is a challenge could actually provide them with an inverter. And you know, the sum of the parts can actually work better than the whole. So essentially, I've not tried to do much other than just trying to rearrange the pieces of the puzzle and putting them all together. So I think it's got a lot to do with, you know, what we seek and what it is that we can soak. And it's a constant struggle to be able to identify challenges and opportunities. But I think what is lacking in the space of CSR, to sum up, is this, that we do not understand who our partners can be. We also do not understand the issues of the country per se. We also do not know what is CSR, and more so now with the legislation which is likely to hit Parliament in the next couple of sessions, which will mandate that 2% of every company's profits have to be dovetailed there. People are going to be up, and they really won't know what CSR is all about. So all I'm trying to say is this, that I haven't really done much other than just rearranging the pieces of the puzzle. You know, it says Columbus discovered America, which is not to say America wasn't there before Columbus set foot on it. So thank you very much, Jerry, and it was nice talking to the audience here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogi. So that was Yogesh Kochchar speaking about his idea about how he plans to rearrange CSR, if I may call it that. Yeah. I must caution you, Yogesh, and everybody else in this room, that there are a lot of charlatan agencies which are coming up because legislation has already been passed about how PSUs have to devote 2% of their profits. So it's 20,000 crores every year. 20,000 crores is lying there for the past 2 years, which people don't know what to do with. There are agencies which are building several CSR forums which are being sponsored by the Vedantas and the Reliances of the world, trying to get the halo effect around them that we are doing good work. So be careful. There are charlatan agencies coming out on both sides.
Yeah, no, I understand, Jerry.
Yeah.
So you know, and I engage with the public sector corporations all the time, and I speak to their chairman, including some that said, you know what, in the name of CSR, we just bought a car and we bought some carpets and we bought some air conditioners because she was coming in to sort of talk to us. Now, that's not CSR, really. The challenge also equally is this, that the CSR budget within a company needs to actually be seen by a social scientist, much less a financial CA.
Yeah.
So you don't need a CA to be able to examine the budget spent or the money spent on CSR by a corporation. You essentially need someone that has social empathy.
I say this because I did a workshop for the UN Global Compact.
Right.
And these were all people from PSUs, who were the Corpcom heads.
Right. So you know, I'm essentially a business guy, and I'll be honest there, because I see what you're talking about. 20,000 crore rupees needs to be spent. What I'm saying is, I'm not going to spend that 20,000 crore rupees. All I want to do is to be able to set up an electronic registry, if that's the right word, where people can actually register themselves, say, I'll lead here, I'll support here. And there's a good chance that people be able to find each other, and we can take a holistic development model within the country, make India competitive, and that's about it. So, you know, very management-ish approach to the whole thing.
Yeah, so there's got to be a lot of kind of training and consulting over there, because these people don't know how to invest the money. They all talk about spending the money. We'll open the floor for questions. Yes, ma'am, we'll have.
Dawa there?
We'll have the person over there. Please pass the microphone over there, Bosco. Let's have some people who have not asked questions ask questions.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
I'm a student. I'm studying in Hansraj College. I've just joined there as an economics student. And what you spoke about, econometrics, the supply and demand, I understand that all these issues that they might be there in our textbooks, but things like the things that you were doing, you're trying to bring those real life economic and business problems and solve them at a level at which all of us can pitch in. So my question is very simple to you. Coming from this commerce/economics kind of a background, we understand the money flows, and a lot of youth in the Delhi University is in fact doing projects for different people. Like there was this project started by Sri Ram College for the rickshawalas over there, where they started funding the rickshawalas, and they got the rickshawalas to actually own the rickshaws they have. So is there some space in your project where we can include the university level students who are willing to put in time? Because I realize that there are two facets with the youth today. Everyone realizes that they want a nice CV. So yes, they're willing to put in those hours for social service, be it for their own personal intention or be it just for a CV. So I see that a lot of power and potential in this youth. Is there any space in your project where we can actually include them and rope them in? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we'll discuss this offline. But yes, there's enough space and more for anybody and everybody that wishes to sort of become part of this whole space, because this actually needs advocacy. We were talking about it, and this needs advocacy of a completely different kind, because we need advocacy first with the United Nations. Secondly, the challenge in India is that United Nations in India are like a square peg in a round hole. So whereas everybody says, UN, thank you very much, you're doing a great job, but just sit there in one corner, don't come back and teach us what. You know, but when the UN officials go down to the ministries and they talk to them, they sort of bow their heads and they say, yeah, we revere you, great reverence, but you know, we won't do any more than that. So you're welcome to sort of engage with me offline, and I'll be happy to take that on. Yeah.
May we have the microphone with Devendra, please?
It's very interesting that you touched upon the MDGs today, because as we speak right now, today and tomorrow, there's a big consultation going on, the national consultation in Delhi.
Yeah, it's at the
and they're going to talk about the post-2015, what to do with the MDGs. So my question to you is that, you know, if the work has not been really great till now, and India has not really progressed very much, you know, upon the 8 goals, what should be the next step? What should India be recommending? You know, can you tell us about that?
So, you know, India has no choice. We can recommend alibis, for instance. That's one thing we can recommend. But you know, we have no choice. We've got to conform to the MDGs, and you know, that's a global vision statement per se that came forth. And unless we adhere to those MDGs, we have very little opportunity. And you know, the spaces we're going to create more Antillas. Is that the name of Mr. Mani's house? So, you know, Mr. Mani if he had an opportunity to do business across all the 650 districts, probably he would have not created an Antilla. You know, so it's sad that, you know, but there's no option, there's no way out. We can confabulate, we can talk about it till the cows get home, but there's no way out. We have to be able to conform to the MDGs. We can give explanations and alibis, but all that's not going to happen. And that's exactly why, you know, in terms of having spoken to several people within the government, and I have access to people, you know, fortunately given the badge that I carry, you know, I've spoken to people and they all agree that yes, there's a definite need for people to become more collaborative. The challenge is, as Jerry pointed out a while ago, a DLF would want to do CSR, where a DLF should be the only company that should be seen doing CSR. So whereas, and that's not possible, you know, CSR is all about, it's about creating sum of the parts that's better than the whole. And that's what CSR is all about. So, you know, even the Tatas for that matter agree, and I've spoken to some of them and say, yes, it's a fact that Tata Chemicals can only go ahead and do CSR within the next 20 or 30 blocks. They can't be responsible for what goes on in the rest of the country. Now, they have fertilizers, right? So they can, for sure, if they can support a project, which is fertilizer or whatever, some farmer, somewhere or the other, it can work wonders. Sure.
Thank you, Yogesh. Yes, Dr. Saini. You just have to hold the microphone a little higher.
It's not. Yeah. No, it's not working. It's not working.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. You have the fancy notion about the CSR and the industry coming down to help the Millennium Development Goals, et cetera, et cetera. I come from an area which is Punjab, which is a very richly, densely populated area, and we have all people residing outside in abroad. So we don't need basically CSR. We have a policy basically framed by one of our administrators around there, in which 50%, if it is contributed by the NRIs,
50% is contributed by the?
non-resident Indians,
Okay.
for the village or for the project,
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
Building a school, a village pond,
Right.
putting down the road,
Right.
or whatever it is. 50% will be given by the government.
Yeah.
So that can be an example. We don't need the industry help around there.
Yeah.
In Punjab, we don't care about the industry. We don't need industry help.
Yeah.
And we should be, industry help is looking like, you look upon crutches, you know.
Yeah.
We don't need crutches to really go on.
Yeah.
We can go on our own. We have the NRI Sammelan in India,
Yeah.
but nothing happens like that.
Yeah. So
no
I think-
policy framework.
I think the approach that I was referring to is a little more organized, and one sparrow does not a summer make. You know, as I say, I come from Punjab, and I'm very proud to call myself a Punjabi because we know that, you know, we have very hardy people, like to work hard, don't go begging. Very few beggars on the streets that are Punjabis, for instance. But that's not alluding to Punjab alone. So India is a bigger country than Punjab. Punjab's just one part of the country. The second aspect also is this, that, you know, initially it sounds very good and great that, you know, NRIs are sending that money in, and the utilization of that funds that must actually happen at the village level must also involve the block development officer, because, you know, mere money will never ensure that projects become sustainable. And that's exactly why in the space of CSR, and I've seen umpteen number of companies, some of us may come from some of those, and I have personally worked for companies in the past, and I can tell you that India is a graveyard of pilots set forth in the name of CSR, and no one has ever revisited any of those pilots that we started with some great, hoo-ha, etc. So there's a challenge around there, but I get your point. There are well-meaning, ostensibly there are some great corporations, there are some very well-meaning people that are saying, you know, take $1 million from me. I mean, why not? So, but you know, there's a need not just to get that money, but to be able to channelize it, to be able to make it auditable, to be able to make it edible for the people that are actually, so that's the idea.
Yes, one more question. Let's have Muktaya ask the last question, then you can catch Yogesh offline.
Yeah.
He's going to be with us.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hello. Some say that CSR is just a tool to mask the exploitation and ill effects of capitalism. And Mr. Ravi Chaudhary over here had proposed restructuring in the tax system, whereby you tax bigger corporates more and smaller industries less. So don't you think that government should consider that as an alternative than making 2% of corporates mandatory? Because then government will have the right to utilize the funds which are taken from the corporates instead of giving them the choice to utilize the funds the way they want, which might not be a very fruitful way as we have seen in the past.
Right, so I think the government's job is essentially to be able to run the nation. And we think that the nation is running, it's a great belief. You know, this is God's own country, as someone was saying, and God alone runs it. And then we also have a government that ostensibly wants you to believe and me to believe that they're running it. So it's a great thing, but you know, the challenge is that the 2% that every company ought to spend must actually be spent on CSR, and I think that's a very, very valuable suggestion. What you're suggesting is great, but you know, it'll tantamount to really reversing the barrel of the telescope and then restarting the debate all over again. So I'm more in favor of going with the flow rather than saying, so there's several ideas that have come through. Sri Salman Khurshid used to be earlier the corporate affairs minister. We met him, and you know, so there's a lot that's happening, and there's a lot of undercurrent that's happening. There's a lot of politics that's involved, etc. But I think it's a great thing if every company must spend. So today what we are saying is, we're saying every company's accounts on the 2% spent on CSR must be audited not by a CA, but by a social scientist. A social scientist who will then take a call whether the carpets that came in and the cars that were bought to ferry, and I'm sure Shishi would be very, very unhappy if he had to be told, you know what, we went ahead and bought carpets and cars because you were coming in and talking to our people. He's not going to be happy. But we still did it, and we sort of filed that away. So I think that's, so I think that sort of goes ahead and tells you.
Okay. So we shall conclude with that. Thank you, Yogesh Kochchar.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. That was Yogesh Kochchar.